Oh my god.
Before most of Europe was awake on January 9, 2026, a silent shift was already underway over the North Atlantic. A winter system that had looked routine only hours earlier suddenly began pulling energy from unusually warm ocean waters, and it didn't just strengthen, it surged. Within a remarkably short time, that system transformed into Storm Goretti. There was no slow build, no extended warning window. One moment, it was a strong Atlantic disturbance. The next, it was a fast-moving wind engine aimed straight at the English Channel. As it closed in, the storm intensified at a pace that caught even experienced forecasters off guard. By the time Goretti slammed into northwestern France, it was already operating at destructive levels. Wind speeds spiked almost instantly. Monitoring stations along the coast lit up with extreme readings. Infrastructure designed for severe weather was suddenly under stress far beyond what had been expected. This wasn't a storm that arrived gradually. It arrived like a switch being flipped. And as Goretti tore across Western Europe, it carried with it a wall of violent wind that would tear through cities, ports, power grids, and transportation systems before much of the region had time to react. Storm Goretti did not arrive quietly. It exploded into northwestern France, ripping across the coastline with a force that instantly pushed entire regions into crisis. Normandy and Brittany found themselves directly in the path of the storm's most destructive winds as the system delivered its full strength the moment it made landfall. Along the coast, instruments recorded gusts exceeding 125 miles per hour, a level of power rarely seen outside major tropical systems. But the numbers only tell part of the story. In towns and villages, the impact was immediate. Roads vanished beneath fallen trees. Rooftops were peeled away and thrown into streets. Power lines dropped in tangled heaps, cutting electricity to neighborhoods in seconds. What began as scattered damage quickly became a region-wide breakdown. By the time morning arrived, the blackout had spread across vast areas of northern France. Hundreds of thousands of homes were without power. Heating systems shut down in the middle of winter. Cell towers and internet service faltered as backup systems struggled to cope. Crews tried to move in, but debris made many roads impassable. Coastal highways were closed. Rural communities became isolated. Even emergency responders were slowed by the wreckage. This was no longer a storm passing through. It was a wind disaster in progress, and Goretti was only just beginning its path across Europe.
Oh my god.
Storm Goretti waited until the darkest hours to strike. While most of northern France slept, the atmosphere over the region destabilized with stunning speed. Shortly after midnight, the storm surged in power, and by the early morning hours it was unleashing its most violent winds across Normandy, Brittany, and the surrounding inland communities. There was no gradual buildup. The peak arrived, suddenly catching entire towns in a state of vulnerability. Homes began to react before people did. Walls trembled. Roofs creaked. Loose panels ripped free and slammed through the air. In many neighborhoods, the roar of the wind grew so loud it sounded mechanical, almost unreal. Residents woke up to a sense that something was wrong long before they could see it. Emergency lines lit up almost immediately. Reports flooded in trees collapsing onto houses, power lines snapping in the streets, debris flying through residential areas. Fire crews and first responders were dispatched into chaos navigating blacked-out roads and near-zero visibility while violent gusts continued to tear at everything in their path. Then the lights went out. Power failures spread rapidly across large sections of northern France, plunging entire communities into darkness. Heating systems stopped. Cell service faltered. Families were left cut off, riding out the storm with no clear sense of what was happening outside their doors. By dawn, it was clear this had not been just another windy night. It was a shockwave one that hit when people were least prepared and left behind fear damage and a long list of unanswered questions.
Hey, come sei? Cái gì vừa rồi?
Lười, bịa mình to lên hả? Em xin mày bịa mình to lên thôi à?
While Storm Goretti tore through the atmosphere, the real danger was rising from the water. Out in the English Channel, the wind transformed the sea into a rolling battlefield. Hurricane-force gusts drove enormous swells toward the French coastline, with offshore buoys measuring waves climbing close to 50 feet. These were not normal storm waves. They arrived like moving walls, slamming into the coast with enough force to overwhelm barriers designed for far weaker systems. The first areas to fail were the harbors. Water surged over docks and seawalls, flooding marinas and spilling into nearby streets. In low-lying neighborhoods, seawater rushed through doors and storefronts, forcing residents to retreat upstairs or evacuate with almost no warning. What had been ordinary waterfront roads turned into fast-moving channels within minutes. Ports were quickly shut down. Fishing boats were ripped from their moorings. Some were smashed into piers, others pushed ashore by the surge. Ferry terminals and cargo docks were abandoned as authorities declared the entire coastline unsafe for navigation. No vessel, commercial or private, was allowed to operate. For people living along the channel, the storm was not just overhead, it was beneath them. Goretti attacked from both sky and sea, at once turning the coast into a front line where waves whined and rising water collided with homes, harbors, and lives in real time.
Hey, come sei? Cái gì vừa rồi?
Lười, bịa mình to lên hả? Em xin mày bịa mình to lên thôi à?
Storm Goretti did not weaken. As it moved inland, it intensified its grip on France. Paris was drawn directly into the heart of the system. Far above, the city wind speeds climbed to nearly 95 miles per hour, a level rarely seen over the capital. The storm no longer belonged to the coast. It had taken control of the entire urban landscape, turning the air itself into a hazard. The damage spread rapidly. Roof panels peeled away. Scaffolding twisted loose. Street signs and construction materials were lifted and thrown across intersections. Mature trees snapped at their roots, crashing into cars and power lines, cutting off entire neighborhoods within minutes. In some areas, streets disappeared beneath tangled debris and fallen cables. Emergency crews moved non-stop. Firefighters and city workers shut down major arteries, carving paths through wreckage so ambulances and rescue units could get through. Buildings with torn roofs were secured as residents were guided away from unstable structures. Every response was made under extreme wind, with debris still flying. Paris is built to withstand pressure, but this was something different. The storm had turned one of Europe's most resilient cities into an open-air danger zone, where even standing outside could be life-threatening. In the middle of the capital storm, Goretti proved that no place, no matter how prepared, is immune when the wind reaches this kind of force. Storm Goretti didn't just batter cities with wind, it pulled the plug on everyday life across two nations. In northern France, the first failure came through the power network. As hurricane-force gusts tore through Normandy and Brittany, towering trees crashed into transmission lines and substations. Entire towns lost electricity in rapid succession. Homes went dark, heating systems shut down. Mobile networks became unstable as backup power struggled to keep towers online. Hospitals and critical facilities were forced onto emergency generators as the grid unraveled. Across the English Channel, the same pattern unfolded. In the southwest of the UK, through the Midlands and into parts of Wales, the wind ripped through overhead lines and electrical infrastructure. Utility crews were sidelined by dangerous conditions, unable to safely begin repairs, while gusts were still powerful enough to bring down more equipment. For many households, the blackout lasted deep into the night as winter temperatures dropped. Then, the transportation system began to fail. Major roads were cut by fallen trees and debris. Vehicles were crushed or trapped. Some communities were suddenly isolated with no clear way for emergency responders to reach them. Dispatch centers were overwhelmed with calls, people reporting collapsed roofs, blocked streets, and homes plunged into darkness. This was no longer just a storm. It was a synchronized breakdown of power, mobility, and safety hitting France and the UK at the same time. If Storm Goretti didn't weaken after crossing France, it came back even more organized and more dangerous. As the system surged across the English Channel, it locked onto the southwest of the United Kingdom, driving straight into one of the nation's most wind-exposed coastlines. Cornwall, Devon, and large parts of Wales were struck head-on as the storm unleashed winds comparable to a powerful tropical system. The force of the impact was undeniable. At St. Mary's Airport on the Isles of Scilly, a wind gust of 99 miles per hour shattered the station's all-time record. Along the coast, buildings rattled under sustained pressure. Roofs peeled away. Trees snapped or toppled, pulling power lines down with them and throwing entire towns into blackout within minutes. Forecasters at the UK Met Office responded with a rare red warning reserved only for storms that pose an immediate threat to life. Authorities acted fast. Schools closed rail service across Cornwall, and Devon was halted and major roads were shut down as debris and fallen trees made travel unsafe. In many communities, residents were told to shelter in place. Outside, flying metal, broken branches, and collapsing structures made the streets more dangerous than the storm itself. This wasn't routine winter weather anymore. It was a rapidly unfolding emergency that turned southwest Britain into a high-risk zone almost overnight.
Oh my god.
Storm Goretti didn't just disrupt the United Kingdom, it shut it down. As hurricane-force winds slammed into the southwest, the first systems to fail were the ones that keep the country moving. In Cornwall and Devon, railway networks were brought to a halt as trees collapsed onto tracks and power to signaling systems went out. Trains were frozen in place. Stations filled with stranded travelers. Coastal communities were suddenly cut off from the rest of the country. The skies weren't any safer. At Birmingham Airport, overnight operations were suspended when heavy snow, ice, and powerful crosswinds made runways unsafe. Across the UK, flights were cancelled, diverted, or stuck circling in turbulent air, unable to land as wind conditions exceeded safety limits. Road travel collapsed next. Gusts hurled debris across highways. Flooded underpasses and fallen trees blocked major routes. Police were forced to close corridors as drivers became trapped between impassable stretches of road. What made this storm so dangerous wasn't just the wind. It was how fast it erased mobility. Within hours, a nation built on constant movement was locked in place. Storm Goretti didn't simply arrive. It took control of the entire transportation network. Before officials could even begin measuring the destruction, Storm Goretti was already changing how people lived minute by minute. Across France and the United Kingdom, power didn't fade slowly. It vanished. Entire blocks dropped into darkness as transmission lines failed under the weight of wind and falling trees. Heating systems shut down in the middle of winter. Phones became lifelines, then liabilities as batteries drained while networks struggled to stay online. Outside, the storm made everyday spaces dangerous. Streets filled with shattered branches, roofing, and twisted metal. Cars were crushed where they were parked. Power lines lay across intersections, sparking in the rain. The simple act of stepping outdoors became a risk few could afford to take. Inside, homes, families waited. Some gathered in hallways away from windows. Others sheltered in interior rooms, listening to the building groan as each gust hit harder than the last. Every bang, every crack of wood felt like the start of something worse. What made it unbearable wasn't just the damage, it was the not knowing. No one could tell when the lights would come back. No one knew what would fall next. Storm Goretti was no longer just a weather system. It was a presence moving from house to house, changing lives in real time. Storm Goretti didn't dominate Europe simply because it was powerful. It did so because it moved faster than anything could keep up with. There was no slow ramp-up, no drawn-out warning phase. In a matter of hours, the storm jumped from severe to catastrophic, catching cities before emergency systems could fully mobilize. What should have been preparation time vanished, replaced by real-time crisis management. At the same moment, Goretti was striking across borders. Northern France was dealing with collapsing power lines, while across the Channel the United Kingdom was losing rail service and electricity. The storm didn't move in a single direction, it expanded outward, forcing responders in multiple countries to fight the same battle at once. Every critical system was under pressure. Ports were flooded, airports lost safe operating windows, highways were buried in debris, communication networks strained as millions tried to get updates and reach family. None of it happened one at a time. It all failed together. That is what turned Goretti into something far larger than a storm. It became a regional shock hitting infrastructure, public safety, and everyday life all at once, faster than any single system could absorb. Storm Goretti was pulling away, but what it left behind was just as dangerous. Across France and the United Kingdom, emergency alerts stayed in effect as officials faced a new crisis. A landscape weakened, flooded, and unstable. Power networks were still down. Roads were blocked. Entire communities were isolated behind debris-fallen trees and flooded streets. Hundreds of thousands of homes remained without electricity. Families sat in cold, dark houses with no heat-limited phone service and no clear timeline for when help would arrive. In many areas, even reaching those neighborhoods was nearly impossible as emergency vehicles were slowed by collapsed infrastructure and submerged roadways. And the threats had shifted. Now the danger was everywhere on the ground, not just in the sky. Damaged trees could topple without warning. Loose roofs and broken walls were ready to give way. Standing seawater hid live power lines and weakened foundations. This was no longer a windstorm, it was a hazard zone. That's why authorities kept urging people to stay inside and off the roads. One wrong step, one unstable structure, one flooded street could turn fatal. The winds may have eased, but Storm Goretti was far from over. When extreme weather strikes, minutes matter, and accurate information saves lives. This channel delivers real-time frontline coverage of the world's most powerful storms, from hurricane-force winds and massive ocean surges to blackouts, travel shutdowns, and infrastructure breakdowns. We don't chase drama. We track reality, showing you what's happening, where it's happening, and how fast it's changing. If this report gave you clarity, hit like to help keep this coverage going. Subscribe to stay connected as major weather events unfold. And share this video with anyone in the storm's path. It could help someone avoid real danger. We post new updates as conditions shift. Stay informed, stay prepared, and most of all, stay safe.